Hello everyone, I welcome you all in the most expected question series for CUET PG English Literature exam. So those of you are preparing for CUET PG 2026 English Literature exam, do like, share and subscribe our YouTube channel to get to know all the important questions that have been already asked in CUET PG and UGC NET JRF. And as you all know, we have already discussed about the Romantic period, Victorian period poetry, and who are the important novelists of early Victorian period. And in today's session, we will discuss some of the important female novelists of Victorian period and who have wrote a lot of works in that time period. And we all know Victorian period is the beginning period of industrialization or modernization. So watch this video till the end to get to know all the important questions from Victorian female writers who have been already asked in your exams. And without further delay, let's begin the session. The first question of today's session is who wrote the novel Jack Max? Jack Mack is one of the most important novels by one of the most important authors of Australia, and the novel Jack Mack is the retelling of Charles Dickens' most important novels, Great Expectations, which is published in the year 1961. And the author who wrote the novel The Jack Mack is Peter Carey. Peter Carey wrote this novel Jack Mack on the theme of Charles Dickens' Great Expectation, and this work is published in the year 1997. The second question is what is the complete title of Jane Eyre? We all know Jane Eyre is the most important novel by Charlotte Bronte, and it was Charlotte Bronte who used the pseudonym Currer Bell. And Charlotte Bronte wrote many other novels like The Professor, Villette, and it is Charlotte Bronte's novel Jane Eyre where he depicts the journey or growth of Jane Eyre from his childhood to an adult or mature person. And the subtitle or the complete title of the novel Jane Eyre is Jane Eyre an Autobiography. Jane Eyre an Autobiography is the complete title of Charlotte Bronte's novel Jane Eyre, and this novel is published in the year 1847. The third question is what is the prequel of Jane Eyre? We all know Jane Eyre. We have already discussed about Jane Eyre and how Charlotte Bronte wrote this novel. But it was in later time period. Many writers wrote different works based on the theme of Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre. And it was in the late 1960s. One of the author who wrote a prequel on the based on the theme of Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre. And the work which is the prequel of Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre is White Sargassoti. White Sargassoti is the prequel of Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre, which is written by John Rice, and this novel is published in the year 1966. And the fourth question is the character Nellie Dean appears in the character Nellie Dean, who is one of the most important characters of late Victorian female novels or late Victorian novels, and the character Nellie Dean appears in Wuthering Heights. Wuthering Heights is one of the most important novels by Emily Bronte, and in this novel the character Nellie Dean is the female protagonist, and the novel is published in the year 1847. The fifth question is what is the subtitle of the novel Silas Marner? We all know Silas Marner is the novel by George Eliot who used the pseudonym Mary and Evans, and the subtitle of the novel Silas Marner is The Weaver of Ravellow. The Weaver of Ravellow is the subtitle of the novel Silas Marner, and the novel is published in the year 1861. The sixth question is what was the last completed novels by George Eliot? George Eliot is one of the most important female novelists of late 19th century, and his last completed novel is Daniel Deronda. Daniel Deronda is the last completed novel by George Eliot, and this novel is published in the year 1876. We all know many questions have been already asked from Victorian novels in CUET PG and UGC NET JRF exam. So those of you are preparing for CUET PG exam, please read the chronology of different Victorian novelists and their works like Charles Dickens, Thomas Hardy, George Eliot, William Makepeace Thackeray. The seventh question is, who wrote the novel Alton Locke? Alton Locke is a novel which depicts industrialization of England or the Victorian social reality, and the novel Alton Locke is written by Charles Kingsley. Charles Kingsley wrote the novel Alton Locke, and this novel is published in the year 1850. The eighth question is, who wrote the sensational novels? In late 19th century, many writers wrote sensational novels, but one of the authors who is known for his sensational novels and the author who wrote sensational novels is Wilkie Collins. Wilkie Collins is a writer who wrote different sensational novels. The ninth question is, who was referred as the last Victorian novelist? In the Victorian period is the emergence period of different novels like novels of character, novels of industrialization, and the author who was known as the last Victorian novelist was R.D. Blackmore. R.D. Blackmore was the author who was known as the last Victorian novels, and his important novel is Lorna Doone. The 10th question is, who wrote the sonnet sequence Modern Love? We all know from the Elizabethan period many sonnet sequences were started. It was Philip Sidney who wrote the sonnet sequence Astrophel and Stella. It was Edmund Spenser who wrote the sonnet sequence Amority. There were many writers who have wrote different sonnet sequences. But in the late 19th century, one author who wrote the sonnet sequence Modern Love, and the author was George Meredith. George Meredith wrote the sonnet sequence Modern Love, which contained 50 sonnets, and the sonnet sequence is published in the year 1862. In the year 1862, George Meredith wrote the sonnet sequence The Modern Love. The 11th question is, who used the pseudonym Charles Ludwig Dodson? Pseudonyms have already asked in your CUET PG exam. In our previous session, we have discussed many writers who use different pseudonyms, and in CUET PG exam, you have to read some of the important pseudonyms of different authors who have used different pseudonyms in their literary works, and the author who used the pseudonym Charles Ludwig Dodson was Lewis Carroll. Lewis Carroll wrote under the pseudonym Charles Ludwig Dodson, and his most important works are The Glass Menagerie, his poem on the Jabberwocky, and the poem The Walrus. The 12th question is, the character Ernest Pontifex appears in which work? The character Ernest Pontifex appears in the work The Way of All Flesh. The character Ernest Pontifex appears in the work The Way of All Flesh, and The Way of the All Flesh is one of the most important work of Samuel Butler, who has also written some of the important works like Irwin. The 13th question is, the title of the novel Far From the Madding Crowd is drawn from. The Far From the Madding Crowd is one of the most important novels by Thomas Hardy, and the title of the novel Far From the Madding Crowd is taken from one of the poems of Romantic poetry, or one of the transitional poem of 18th century, Thomas Gray's Elegy written in the country churchyard. Thomas Gray's Elegy written in a country churchyard is the poem which is published in the year 1751, and from this work Thomas Hardy drawn the title of his novel Far From the Madding Crowd. The 14th question is what is the subtitle of the novel The Mayor of Casterbridge? The Mayor of Casterbridge is one of the most important novels by Thomas Hardy. The subtitle of the novel is The Life and Death of a Man of Character. The Life and Death of a Man of Character is the subtitle of the novel The Mayor of Casterbridge, and this novel is published in the year 1886. The 15th question is happiness was but the occasional episode in a general drama of life. The line happiness was but the occasional episode in general drama of life is taken from one of the most important novels of late Victorian period, and the line is taken from the novel The Mayor of Casterbridge. The 16th question is what is the subtitle of the novel Tales of the Dear Werewolves? Tales of the Dear Werewolves. In this novel, Thomas Hardy introduced a new woman character which named as Tess, and in this novel he depicts the journey of Tess, and the subtitle of the novel Tales of the Dear Werewolves is A Pure Woman. In this novel, Thomas Hardy depicts Tess as a pure woman. The 18th question is who wrote the novel Treasure Island? The novel Treasure Island is also in one of the important novels of late Victorian period, and the novel The Treasure Island is written by R.L. Stevenson. R.L. Stevenson wrote the novels The Treasure Island. R.L. Stevenson wrote the novel The Treasure Island. The 19th question is who introduced the fictional detective Sherlock Holmes? We all know and we have already read about Sherlock Holmes, and many series is also based on the character or detective character Sherlock Holmes, and the author of the late Victorian period introduced the character Sherlock Holmes for the first time in his work, and the author who introduced Sherlock Holmes is Arthur Conan Doyle. Arthur Conan Doyle introduced the detective character Sherlock Holmes. The 20th question is who created the character Peter Pan? The character Peter Pan is one of the most important characters in the Victorian late novels, and it is the character which is similar with Don Quixote's character, Don Quixote's servant Sancho Panza, and the character Peter Pan is created by James Barrie. James Barrie created the character Peter Pan. The 21st number question is who translated the work Wilhelm Mr. Apprentice? Wilhelm Mr. Apprentice is a work by the German philosopher or German writer Wolfgang von Goethe, and this work is translated in later time by the author Thomas Carlyle. Thomas Carlyle, who was famous for his work Chartism, and he introduced or he translated the work. The 22nd question is who was known as Victorian sage writer or prophet? The author who wrote many novels and many critical works in the Victorian time period. The author who was famous for his critical works in the Victorian time period was known as the Victorian poet or Victorian sage writer and prophet. The author who was known as Victorian sage or prophet was John Ruskin. John Ruskin was known as the Victorian sage or prophet. The 23rd question is who said that Shakespeare has no heroes, only heroine? This statement is said by one of the most important critics of Victorian period, and the critic who used the phrase that Shakespeare has no heroes, only heroine is John Ruskin. John Ruskin used the phrase Shakespeare has no heroes but only heroines. The 24th number question is who wrote the work Eminent Victorian? Eminent Victorian is a work which is written in Victorian time period, and in this work the author depicted various important persons or various important figures of Victorian time period, and the work the Victorian or Eminent Victorian is written by Leighton Strachey. Leighton Strachey wrote this work Victorian period, and we have to know that Leighton Strachey was one of the most important members of Bloomsbury Group. Bloomsbury Group is a literary group which is founded by Virginia Woolf and Leonard Woolf, and Leighton Strachey was one of the most important members of this group. The 25th or the last question is the character Lemberstrather appear in which work? The character Lemberstrather appears in the work The Ambassador. In the work The Ambassador, the character Lemberstrather appears, and this work is published in the year 1903. These are the 25 questions from late Victorian female novelists. So those of you are preparing for CUET PG 2026 English Literature exam, do like, share and subscribe our YouTube channel to get to know all the important questions and study materials. Thank you everyone for watching this video.